The amber light of Vexara's setting sun streamed through the crystalline windows of the grand reception hall, casting elongated shadows across the polished stone floor. Captain Marcus Hale stood at rigid attention, his Earth Alliance formal uniform uncomfortably tight across his broad shoulders. He scanned the room methodically, cataloging exits, identifying potential threats, and occasionally making eye contact with the other human security personnel stationed discreetly throughout the hall. 6 years of frontline combat and 3 more in diplomatic security had taught Marcus to trust his instincts. Something felt off tonight. The Vexaran nobles glided through the hall in their flowing robes of iridescent fabric, their slender forms and luminescent skin marking them as distinctly alien despite their humanoid appearance. Their conversations dropped to whispers whenever they passed near the Earth delegation. "Relax, Captain. You look like you're expecting an ambush," Ambassador Ray murmured, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of the local amber spirit. She handed one to Marcus, who accepted it, but didn't drink. "Force of habit, ma'am," he replied, his eyes never ceasing their sweep of the room. "This alliance is fragile. Not everyone here is pleased about Earth's expanding influence." Ambassador Ray sighed. "That's precisely why we need you to look slightly less like you're calculating how quickly you could neutralize everyone in the room." Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious. "The princess's ascension is a pivotal moment. If she secures her position as heir, the progressive faction gains significant power. That's good for Earth." Marcus nodded curtly. He understood the stakes, even if politics made his skin crawl. 3 years ago, an unexpected first contact with Vexara had opened possibilities for both worlds, advanced biotechnology from the Vexarans in exchange for Earth's innovative engineering solutions. But the traditionalist faction led by Lord Zorath saw any alliance with outside species as a threat to Vexaran purity and ancient customs. The crystalline chimes rang out, signaling the entrance of the royal family. The crowd parted, creating a pathway from the grand doors to the ceremonial dais. First came the aging sovereign, his tall frame slightly stooped with age, the bioluminescent markings on his face and hands pulsing with a pale blue light. Behind him walked Lord Zorath, the sovereign's nephew, his face a mask of dignified pride. And then she entered. Princess Selene Vix moved with the fluid grace of all Vexarans, but there was a martial precision to her steps that spoke of her controversial cadet training. The first female heir in centuries, she had broken tradition merely by existing. Her decision to pursue military education alongside the traditional royal arts had scandalized the court even further. "She's younger than I expected," Marcus commented quietly to Ambassador Ray. "By our standards, perhaps. She's nearly 70 Earth years old, though physically equivalent to someone in their late 20s. Vexarans have much longer lifespans than we do." Marcus studied the princess with renewed interest. Despite her age, there was something untested about her, a vulnerability beneath the poised exterior. Her silver-white hair was pulled back in an elaborate series of braids, interwoven with ceremonial crystals that caught the light with every movement. The traditional royal markings on her face, similar to the tattoos of her people, but with a subtle glow, traced delicate patterns from her temples down to her throat, disappearing beneath the high collar of her formal attire. As the royal family took their positions on the dais, Lord Zorath stepped forward to address the gathered dignitaries. His resonant voice filled the hall without apparent effort. "Esteemed nobles of Vexara, honored guests from distant stars, we welcome you to the grand canopy ceremony, the first step in Princess Selene's formal recognition as heir to the sovereign's mantle." Marcus noted how Zorath's voice tightened almost imperceptibly when mentioning Selene's status. Ambassador Ray had briefed him thoroughly on the court dynamics. Zorath had been the presumptive heir until the unexpected declaration of Selene's legitimacy 10 years ago. Many still believed he should rule when the current sovereign passed. The ceremony progressed with the formal, measured pace of traditions centuries old. Marcus, forced himself to maintain vigilance despite the hypnotic quality of the Vexaran ritual movements and harmonic chanting. As Princess Selene moved to the center of the dais to receive the blessing of ancients, a critical component of her recognition, as heir Marcus, noticed a subtle shift in the guard's formation. One of the ceremonial guards, standing behind the princess, adjusted his position slightly, his hand drifting to the ceremonial dagger at his waist. The movement was so minimal that no one else seemed to notice, but Marcus had seen that same subtle preparation for attack countless times on the battlefield. In that split second, training overtook thought. Marcus lunged forward, breaking protocol and startling the Earth delegates. He vaulted over the low barrier separating the audience from the royal dais, just as the guard drew his blade and lunged toward the princess's exposed back. Time seemed to slow. Marcus threw himself between the princess and her attacker, feeling the cold bite of metal as the ceremonial dagger slid between his ribs. He heard gasps, shouts, the clatter of weapons as royal guards converged. The pain bloomed hot and sharp as he collapsed to his knees, one hand clutching at the wound while the other instinctively reached out to steady himself against the princess. Their eyes met his, filled with pain, hers with shock. Then Marcus felt himself falling forward as darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard before consciousness slipped away was Princess Selene's clear, commanding voice. "The Theosy is activated. This human's blood has been spilled in my defense. By the laws of our ancestors, I claim the debt of life." Marcus drifted through fragmented dreams. Battlefield remnants mingled with strange visions of glowing blue tendrils, wrapping around his chest, spreading warmth through his body. Occasionally, he surfaced close enough to consciousness to catch snippets of hushed conversations. The bonding is taking hold faster than expected. Unprecedented with an off-worlder, Lord Zoreth will challenge. Awakening soon. When Marcus finally opened his eyes, the unfamiliar ceiling above him seemed to pulse gently with its own inner light. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his side. "Please remain still, Captain Hale. The healing membranes are still integrating." The voice belonged to a Vexaran female in what appeared to be medical attire, a luminescent white garment with intricate blue patterns that matched the glowing markings on her hands. She moved to his bedside and adjusted something beyond his field of vision. "Where am I?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from disuse. "The royal infirmary within the palace. You have been unconscious for 3 rotations." 3 days. Marcus tried to piece together his fragmented memories. "The assassination attempt, the princess is unharmed, thanks to your intervention." The medical attendant's expression softened. "She has visited you each day during your recovery. I will inform her you are awake." Before Marcus could ask more questions, the attendant glided from the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the strange pulsing ceiling. He carefully lifted the light covering over his chest to examine his wound. What he saw made him freeze. Where there should have been a bandage, or at least an angry red gash, there was instead a pattern of luminescent blue filaments embedded in his skin. They pulsed gently in rhythm with his heartbeat spreading outward from the wound, like delicate frost patterns on glass. He touched one cautiously and felt an odd resonance as though the filaments responded to his touch. "Vexaran biotechnology," came a voice from the doorway. "Quite remarkable, isn't it?" Princess Selene entered, wearing a simpler version of her ceremonial attire. Up close, without the distance of the reception hall between them, Marcus could better appreciate the alien beauty of her features, the slight luminescence of her skin, the depth of her eyes that shifted between violet and indigo depending on the light. Marcus tried to sit up straighter, his military training instinctively responding to the presence of royalty. "Your Highness, Please, there is no need for formality between us now, Captain Hale." She approached his bedside, her movements fluid, yet somehow hesitant. "Not after what has transpired." "What exactly has transpired?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the glowing pattern on his chest. "Besides some very unusual medical treatment. A small smile touched Celine's lips. The healing membranes are a result of the thiazi bond that now connects us. They will fade as you heal, though a subtle pattern may remain a mark of the life debt between us. Life debt. Marcus repeated the phrase, triggering his memory of her final words before he lost consciousness. You mentioned that in the hall. Celine nodded, her expression growing more serious. Thiazi is one of our most ancient and sacred traditions. When blood is spilled in defense of royalty, a bond is formed, unbreakable, lifelong, between the one who bleeds and the one who is protected. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. It is. More than gratitude, more than obligation. It is a mingling of destinies. Marcus frowned, trying to absorb the implications. And this applies even though I'm human. I'm not even one of your people. That is precisely what makes your situation so unprecedented. Celine seated herself in the chair beside his bed. There has never been a recorded thiazi bond between a Vexaran royal and an off-worlder. Many traditionalists are disturbed by this development. I imagine Lord Zorath is among them. A flicker of surprise crossed Celine's features. You know of my cousin's politics. Ambassador Ray briefed me thoroughly before this assignment. I know he leads the faction opposed to Earth Alliance, and that he expected to inherit the throne before you were named heir. Celine's eyes darkened slightly. Zorath believes in Vexaran exceptionalism above all else. The attempt on my life. She stopped, composing herself. The assassin was one of his loyalists, though we cannot prove Zorath ordered the attack. He has denounced the action publicly, of course. Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. What happens now? Now we must navigate something no Vexaran has experienced before, a thiazi bond with a human. Celine's markings pulsed slightly brighter as she spoke, betraying her emotion despite her controlled tone. Traditionally, there are 4 stages to thiazi proximity, truth protection, and complete bonding. And those entail what exactly? Proximity is the first stage, the initial physical and mental connection. That has already begun with your healing. The membranes are not merely repairing your flesh. They are creating pathways between us. Marcus tensed. Pathways like some kind of mind control. No, Celine said quickly. Nothing so invasive. Rather a heightened awareness of each other, particularly in moments of danger or strong emotion. As the bond strengthens, this awareness will grow. That sounded uncomfortably intimate to Marcus, but he nodded for her to continue. The second stage, truth, requires mutual disclosure, a sharing of histories, fears, hopes. It cannot be forced or falsified. The bond itself rejects deception. Her voice softened. This stage typically occurs over several months. And the others? Protection is the third stage, a demonstration that the bond serves its purpose in both directions. You have already protected me. Eventually, I must protect you in kind. Something in her tone made Marcus suspect there was more to it than simple reciprocity, but before he could ask, a chime sounded from the door. Forgive the interruption, Your Highness, said the medical attendant, returning with a small entourage that included Ambassador Ray. The Sovereign requests your presence in the council chamber. Lord Zorath has called for an emergency session regarding the incident. Celine rose gracefully, though Marcus detected tension in her shoulders. Of course. Please inform my father I will attend immediately. She turned back to Marcus. Rest and heal, Captain. We will speak again soon. Her fingertips brushed lightly against the back of his hand, a gesture so brief he might have imagined it before she departed with her attendants. Ambassador Ray remained behind, her expression a mixture of concern and calculation. Once they were alone, she moved to Marcus's bedside. Well, Captain, you've certainly complicated our diplomatic mission. Despite her words, there was no rebuke in her tone, only a wry acknowledgement of the situation. Sorry, ma'am. Next time I'll let the princess get stabbed. Ambassador Ray's mouth twitched with suppressed amusement. That sharp tongue might serve you well in court. You're going to need every advantage. She became serious again. This life debt business, it changes your status here completely. You're no longer just Earth Alliance security. According to Vexaran law, you now have a formal connection to their royal house. The princess mentioned stages, Marcus said. Something about proximity and truth. And she didn't mention the fourth stage. When Marcus shook his head, Ambassador Ray sighed. Complete bonding traditionally culminates in a formal union, what we might consider a marriage, though it's both more and less than that in their culture. Marcus felt as though the wound in his side had reopened. Marriage to an alien princess, that's politically complicated, Ambassador Ray finished for him. Especially given the current tensions. Lord Zorath is already characterizing your actions as an Earth Alliance plot to infiltrate the royal bloodline. That's ridiculous, Marcus protested. I was just doing my job. I know that. But you need to understand what you've stepped into. The Thiassi tradition is central to Vexaran culture. It's how they've determined succession and formed alliances for millennia. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Captain, I won't order you to pursue this bond. I couldn't even if I wanted to. This goes beyond your duties to Earth. But I will say this Princess Selene represents our best hope for a lasting alliance. Her cousin would sever all ties with Earth the moment he gained power. Marcus stared at the glowing pattern on his chest, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. A simple, instinctive action, the kind of protective move drilled into him through years of training, had somehow entangled him in alien politics and mystical traditions. What would you do? He asked finally. Ambassador Ray stood straightening her uniform. I'd remember that sometimes the greatest service we can offer isn't following orders. It's following our humanity. She moved toward the door. Rest now. Once you're cleared by the medical staff, we'll arrange quarters for you within the palace. It seems you're going to be here longer than we anticipated. After she left, Marcus lay back against the pillows, watching the subtle pulse of the healing membranes across his chest. He had survived 3 war zones and countless diplomatic crises, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. A life debt to an alien princess, potential marriage, court intrigue. And somewhere in the palace, a man who wanted the princess dead and who would now likely see Marcus as an additional obstacle to be removed. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of recovery and adjustment. Marcus was moved from the infirmary to a suite of rooms in the east wing of the palace, close enough to the royal apartments to satisfy the Thiassi bond's proximity requirement, but far enough away to maintain propriety, as the court chamberlain had explained, with obvious discomfort. The rooms were luxurious by any standard, with high ceilings that mimicked the bioluminescent quality of the infirmary, and walls that seemed to shift subtly in color, depending on the time of day. Furnishings were minimal, but elegant, carved from materials that resembled both wood and stone, while being neither. Most striking was the balcony that overlooked the city's central spires, their amber glow particularly intense at dusk. It was on this balcony, 16 days after the assassination attempt, that Princess Selene found Marcus performing a series of careful combat exercises, modified to accommodate his still healing wound. Your recovery progresses well, she observed, watching as he moved through a slow sequence of strikes and blocks. Marcus lowered his arms, slightly self-conscious. Your healers know their craft. On Earth, I'd still be bedridden or at least restricted from physical activity. May I? Selene gestured toward his side where the wound had been. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus nodded and lifted the edge of his training shirt. The glowing filaments had faded somewhat, but were still visible, a delicate latticework of blue light beneath his skin. Selene's fingers hovered just above the pattern, not quite touching. The membrane integration is nearly complete. You've adapted to our biotechnology remarkably well. Is that unusual? Unprecedented would be more accurate. Her eyes met his. The healers say it suggests a high degree of compatibility between us. The Thiassi bond is strengthening faster than anyone anticipated. Marcus lowered his shirt, unsure how to respond to that. He'd noticed certain sensations over the past days, Moments of emotion that didn't seem to be his own, flashes of determination, anxiety, and occasionally a wistful sort of longing. He hadn't mentioned these experiences to anyone, half convinced they were simply side effects of the Vexarin healing treatments. "I've been permitted to leave my rooms for 3 days now," he said instead, "but this is the first I've seen of you since the infirmary. I was beginning to wonder if you were avoiding me." A small smile touched Celine's lips. "Court politics have kept me occupied. My formal recognition ceremony has been delayed due to recent events. Zorath's doing... My cousin has been most concerned about the unprecedented nature of our bond." The diplomatic phrasing didn't mask the tension in her voice. "He has petitioned the Council of Elders to declare the Thiaci invalid, due to your non-Vexarin status." Can they do that? Marcus wasn't sure why the possibility bothered him so much. A week ago, he would have welcomed an easy exit from this complicated situation. "The Council is divided. This is why I've come to you today." Celine's expression grew more serious. "We must begin the second stage of Thiaci truth, more formally than I had intended. There will be a ritual witnessed by the High Priestess and members of the Council. If they observe genuine resonance between us during the truth rite, Zorath's petition will lose significant support." Marcus frowned. "What exactly does this ritual involve?" "A guided exchange of truths within the Temple of Ancestors. The physical space amplifies the Thiaci bond, making deception impossible and genuine disclosure illuminating." She hesitated. "It requires vulnerability, Captain. From both of us." "Marcus," he corrected automatically. "If we're going to be sharing truths, you might as well use my name." Something flickered across Celine's face. Surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "Marcus," she repeated the name, sounding musical in her Vexarin accent. "The ritual is scheduled for tomorrow's sunset. I know this is sudden, but court machinations have forced my hand." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand political necessity, Your Highness." "Celine," she countered with a hint of what might have been humor. "If we're sharing truths, you might as well use my name." Despite his reservations about the situation, Marcus found himself smiling. "Fair enough, Celine." She turned to leave, then paused at the balcony doorway. "The ritual will be intense. It would be beneficial if we establish some comfort with each other beforehand. Would you join me for the evening meal in my private gardens?" It wasn't really a request, despite being phrased as one. Marcus recognized the political necessity of preparing for tomorrow's ritual. Still, he found himself nodding with more eagerness than the situation strictly required. "I'd be honored." Celine's private gardens proved to be a marvel of alien horticulture. Plants that resembled ferns unfurled glowing tendrils in response to movement. Crystalline flowers chimed softly in the evening breeze. A small stream wound through the space, its water glimmering with the same bioluminescence that seemed to permeate all Vexarin design. They dined on a curious mixture of Vexarin and Earth cuisine, a diplomatic gesture that Marcus appreciated, even if some of the combinations were unexpected. The conversation began stiffly with safe topics, like the differences in their respective worlds' climates and architecture. As the twin moons of Vexara rose above them, however, something in the atmosphere shifted. Perhaps it was the sweet, slightly intoxicating nectar that served as the Vexaran equivalent of wine, or perhaps it was the growing awareness between them, the Thiaci bond making its presence known in subtle ways. "Tell me," Celine said, after a comfortable silence had stretched between them, "what made you join Earth's security forces? Was it family tradition?" Marcus swirled the luminescent nectar in his glass. "Nothing so noble. I grew up in a district with limited opportunities. Military service offered education, stability, purpose." He shrugged slightly. "I was good at it." "Good at following orders or good at war?" The question was unexpected in its directness. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Good at protecting people. The rest was just the vehicle for that." Celine nodded, as though his answer confirmed something she had suspected. And now you protect diplomats instead of fighting on the front lines. Was that choice or circumstance? Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the prelude to memories he preferred to keep buried. Both, he said shortly. Then, aware of how abrupt he sounded, he added, "There was an incident. Civilian casualties during a rebellion on Nova Colony. My unit was given bad intelligence." He expected her to press for details most people did when they sensed a story, but Celine simply nodded again, her expression thoughtful. "Responsibility weighs heavily even when the fault lies elsewhere," she said softly. "I understand that burden." Something in her tone made Marcus believe she truly did understand. "Your military training," he recalled. "That was controversial for a princess, wasn't it?" A slight smile curved Celine's lips. "Nearly as controversial as being female. Vexaran tradition held that only males of the royal line could undergo the combat rites. I argued that if I was to lead our people, I should understand the disciplines that protect them. That couldn't have been popular with the traditionalists." "It was not," she agreed, her smile fading. "Particularly with Zorath, who had excelled in his own combat rites. He saw my participation as diminishing the achievement." "He seems to see your entire existence as an affront," Marcus observed dryly. Celine's laugh was unexpected, a clear musical sound that seemed to make the garden around them brighten slightly. "You have a direct way of speaking, Marcus Hale. It is refreshing after a lifetime of court politics." "Sorry, diplomacy isn't my specialty." "Don't apologize. Truth between us will be crucial tomorrow." She leaned forward slightly, her expression growing serious again. "The ritual will seek our deepest truths, the ones we guard most carefully. It would be easier if we approach it as a mutual unburdening rather than an extraction." Marcus met her gaze. "You're saying we should practice?" "I'm saying I would like to offer a truth freely, outside the ritual context, and invite you to do the same." The weight of her words hung in the air between them. This wasn't mere diplomatic preparation, it was a genuine opening, a vulnerability offered by choice, rather than necessity. "All right," Marcus said finally. "Ladies first." Celine inclined her head in acknowledgement. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts, then spoke in a voice just above a whisper. "I am afraid I will fail my people. The reforms I seek opening Vexara to the wider universe, creating more equitable structures within our society, they represent significant change. Change breeds fear, and fear can turn quickly to hatred." Her fingers traced patterns on the table's surface. "Every day I question whether my vision is worth the fracturing of traditions that have sustained us for millennia." The confession hung in the air, simple, yet profound in its honesty. Marcus recognized the courage it took for a leader to voice such doubts. "Your turn," she said gently. Marcus took a deep breath, searching for a truth of equal weight. What emerged surprised even him. "I've spent 6 years trying to atone for a mistake that killed 17 civilians. I took a security posting because I thought it would be safer, fewer chances to make catastrophic errors." His hand drifted unconsciously to the healing wound at his side. "But when I saw that guard reach for his dagger, I didn't hesitate. I acted on instinct, knowing it might cost my life, and in that moment, I felt more clarity than I have in years. Like maybe saving one life could begin to balance those I couldn't save." The words left him feeling oddly lighter, as though speaking the truth had released something long trapped inside him. When he looked up, he found Celine watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret, something between sorrow and recognition, as though she saw in him a reflection of her own hidden burdens. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the truth and for my life." The bioluminescent plants around them seemed to pulse gently, responding to the emotional resonance between them. Marcus became aware of a warmth spreading through his chest, emanating from the healing wound, the Thiassi bond responding to their shared honesty. As the evening drew to a close, and they walked back toward the palace proper, Celine paused beneath an archway of twining glowing vines. "Tomorrow will not be easy," she said, "but I believe we have made a good beginning." On impulse, Marcus reached out and took her hand, a breach of protocol that would have horrified the court chamberlain. But instead of pulling away, Celine's fingers curled around his, her skin cool and smooth against his calloused palm. "A good beginning," he agreed. The Temple of Ancestors stood apart from the main palace complex, its amber spires reaching toward Vixara's violet sky like grasping fingers. Unlike the flowing organic architecture that characterized most Vexaran structures, the temple had a rigid geometric quality, all sharp angles and precise measurements, as though to underscore the immutability of the traditions it housed. Marcus arrived escorted by Captain Wren of the Royal Guard, a stern Vexaran, who had made his initial distrust of the human abundantly clear. Over the past weeks, however, that distrust had gradually given way to a reluctant respect, particularly after Marcus had bested several of Wren's guards in a training exercise. Today, the Vexaran captain seemed almost sympathetic. "The truth rite can be unsettling for those experiencing it for the first time," Wren said as they approached the temple's massive doors. "Even those born to our traditions sometimes find it overwhelming." "Comforting," Marcus replied dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Wren's usually stoic features. "You have shown unexpected adaptation to our ways, Earth Captain. Perhaps today we'll continue that pattern." Inside the temple's main chamber, stretched upward into shadows, its ceiling lost in darkness, despite the amber light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. At the center of the chamber stood a circular platform surrounded by smaller pedestals, where members of the Council of Elders had already taken their positions. Lord Zorath stood among them, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes burned with undisguised contempt when they landed on Marcus. High Priestess Sirona awaited them at the platform's edge. Ancient even by Vexaran standards, she nevertheless moved with surprising fluidity as she gestured for Marcus to approach. "The off-worlder comes before the ancestors," she announced, her voice carrying through the chamber without apparent effort. "He bears the mark of Thiassi, yet his blood is not of Vexara. The council gathers to witness whether the bond is true or false." As if on cue, the massive doors opened again, and Princess Celine entered. She wore ceremonial robes of deep indigo embroidered with patterns that matched the markings on her skin. Those markings seemed more vivid today, pulsing with a brighter light than Marcus had observed before. Their eyes met across the chamber, and Marcus felt the now familiar warmth spread from his wound, the Thiassi bond responding to her presence. Something flickered across Celine's face, surprise perhaps, and he wondered if she felt a similar reaction. "Princess Celine Vix approaches the ancestors," intoned the High Priestess. "She who bears royal blood comes to test the truth of her bond." Celine ascended the platform and took her place opposite Marcus, the circular space between them beginning to glow with an inner light. "The circle of truth awakens," Sirona continued. "Within its boundary, deception withers and truth blossoms. The bond will be tested through revelation." She turned to the watching council members. "Who among you would question the bond-bearers?" Lord Zorath stepped forward immediately. "I would question them, High Priestess." Sirona inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Proceed, Lord Zorath. But remember, the circle permits only questions that seek truth, not those designed to wound or manipulate." Zorath's mouth tightened marginally at the rebuke, but he composed himself quickly. "My first question is for the off-worlder." He deliberately avoided using Marcus's name or rank. "Did you leap to protect our princess with full knowledge of the Thiassi tradition and its implications?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I had no knowledge of the tradition or its implications. I acted purely on instinct and training." As he spoke, the circular space between him and Celine pulsed with blue light. Marcus felt a curious sensation as though his words were being drawn directly from his core, rather than simply spoken. "The circle affirms truth," Sirona announced. Zorath frowned slightly, but continued. "For the princess, then. Did you invoke the Thiassi, knowing it had never before been applied to an off-worlder, and that doing so might be considered a manipulation of our sacred traditions?" Celine lifted her chin. I invoked the Thiasi, because it was the truth of what occurred, blood spilled in royal defense. That the defender was human does not change the nature of his sacrifice or my obligation. The circle pulsed again, brightening. As for manipulation, I acted according to the laws that have governed our people since the First Awakening. It is not I who seek to bend traditions for political advantage, cousin. Whispers rippled through the council at her pointed counter. The circle affirms truth. Sirona repeated a hint of satisfaction in her tone. Zorath's questions continued growing increasingly specific and personal. He questioned Marcus about his military past, clearly fishing for information that might paint him as a threat or infiltrator. He questioned Celine about her reforms and alliances, trying to frame her as a radical willing to abandon Vexaran heritage for foreign influences. Throughout the circle continued to pulse with affirmation. Whatever else might be said about them, neither Marcus nor Celine was lying. Eventually, High Priestess Sirona raised her hand. The questioning from the council is complete. Now comes the heart of the rite, the mutual revelation between bond-bearers. She gestured, and the other council members stepped back, the pedestals they had occupied receding into the floor. Only Sirona remained her role as facilitator essential to the ritual. Face one another, she instructed. Place your hands over the wounds that initiated the bond, his physical wound, her obligation wound. Marcus placed his hand over the healing pattern on his ribs. Across from him, Celine placed her palm against her heart. Now speak the truths you guard most closely, the burdens you carry alone. The circle will guide you. The bond will strengthen through shared vulnerability. Marcus hesitated, uncertain how to begin. But then he felt a gentle pressure from the Thiasi bond, like a question seeking answer. Words rose to his lips unbidden. I led a unit during the Nova Colony Rebellion. He began, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. We were ordered to clear a sector reported to harbor insurgent leaders. Intelligence was wrong. The building contained families, civilians seeking shelter. He swallowed hard. I gave the order to breach before confirming occupants. 17 dead, 7 of them children. The circle's light intensified, and Marcus felt something shift within the bond, as though a door had been opened between his consciousness and Celine's. He could sense her reaction, not pity, but understanding, an echo of similar regret. I visit their names in my mind each night. He continued, the truth flowing more freely now. I accepted this diplomatic posting, hoping for redemption, but dreading that I don't deserve it. When I threw myself in front of that blade, part of me welcomed the possibility of an ending. The circle flared brightly, and Marcus felt the wound at his side pulse in response. Across from him, tears shimmered in Celine's eyes, though her posture remained regal. I was born in secret, she said, her turn now to reveal. My existence kept hidden for the first 12 years of my life. My mother was not the sovereign's sanctioned consort, but a scholar from the outer provinces, a woman of common birth who caught the sovereign's heart, but was deemed unsuitable by the council. Murmurs of shock rippled through the chamber. This was clearly not common knowledge even among the elders. I was raised in isolation, taught that my very existence was a potential threat to stability. When the sovereign finally acknowledged me, it was because his sanctioned consort had failed to produce an heir, and succession law demanded a blood relative. Celine's voice remained steady despite the painful admission. My cousin Zorath had already been groomed for leadership. My sudden appearance as rival destroyed his certainty and created a division that has only widened with time. The circle pulsed with validation. Marcus felt the connection between them strengthening, allowing him to sense the complex emotions beneath her words. Guilt over disrupting Zorath's expectations, determination to prove herself worthy, despite her irregular origins, fear that her reforms might destroy, rather than strengthen her people. I pursue alliance with Earth and other worlds not merely for political advantage, but because isolation has poisoned our culture, Celine continued. I have seen what happens when tradition becomes prison rather than foundation. Yet I fear I lack the strength to guide my people through the changes I believe necessary. Her gaze locked with Marcus's. When you stepped between me and that blade, you saved more than my life. You saved the possibility of the future I envision. A future I often doubt I deserve to create. The circle's light expanded outward, enveloping them both in a cocoon of blue-white radiance. Marcus felt the Thiasi bond surge, creating pathways of awareness and connection that transcended language. In that moment, he understood Celine more completely than words alone could convey her hopes, fears, regrets, and determination. And he realized with a start, she understood him just as thoroughly. High Priestess Sirona's voice seemed to come from very far away. The circle has affirmed the truth of their bond. The Thiasi between Princess Celine Vix and Captain Marcus Hale is genuine and valid under the laws of our ancestors. The light receded gradually, though the enhanced awareness between Marcus and Celine remained a humming presence at the edge of consciousness, like a conversation heard through a wall. When the light had fully dimmed, Marcus found himself unsteady on his feet. Celine appeared similarly affected, though she maintained her royal composure with impressive control. Lord Zorath's voice cut through the reverent silence that had fallen over the chamber. Ritual confirms connection, not suitability. His tone was brittle, with barely contained fury. An off-worlder cannot serve as royal consort regardless of bonds or blood spilled. Our laws are clear. Our laws speak of worthiness, not origin, countered an elder that Marcus didn't recognize. This human has shown courage, honesty, and honor qualities our traditions value above all others. The bond itself has judged him worthy, added another council member. Who are we to question what the ancestors have blessed? Zorath's face contorted with rage for an instant before he mastered himself. This matter is not concluded, he said coldly. The full council must debate the implications before any further recognition is granted. With a stiff bow toward the High Priestess, he turned and strode from the chamber, several allies following in his wake. Sirona watched them go with ancient, knowing eyes. When the doors had closed behind them, she turned to Marcus and Celine. The second stage is complete, she said. The bond grows strong between you, stronger than any I have witnessed in my lifetime. But be warned, those who oppose it will not yield easily to tradition alone. We understand, High Priestess, Celine replied. We will proceed with caution. As they left the temple, the enhanced awareness between them made words unnecessary. Marcus could sense Celine's mixture of relief and apprehension, relief that the ritual had validated their bond, apprehension about Zorath's next move. He suspected she could sense his own confusion and growing determination in return. Captain Wren waited to escort them back to the palace, his expression betraying nothing of what had transpired in the chamber. But as they walked, he positioned himself slightly differently than before, forming a protective triangle with Marcus and Celine, rather than simply guarding Marcus as a potential threat. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the shifting perceptions within the palace. The Thiasi bond had been confirmed as genuine. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the way things had been before. Life in the royal palace took on a new rhythm after the truth rite. Marcus found himself included in briefings and councils that would normally have been closed to Earth personnel. Some Vexaran nobles avoided him entirely, while others sought him out with curious questions about his world and customs. Captain Wren began including him in guard rotations, tacitly acknowledging his role in the princess's protection. Most significantly, he and Celine spent time together daily, sometimes in formal settings, with advisors present, sometimes alone in her gardens or his chambers. The Thiasi bond continued to strengthen, developing from vague emotional awareness into something more refined. Marcus could now sense Celine's location within the palace, without being told, could feel shifts in her emotional state, even when they were apart. It should have been intrusive, even frightening. Instead, he found it oddly comforting, like the awareness of a trusted partner covering his flank in combat. 3 weeks after the truth rite, Marcus was awakened in the pre-dawn hours by a sharp spike of anxiety across the bond. He was out of bed and halfway dressed before he even consciously registered what had happened. Something was wrong. Celine was frightened. No alert. Concerned. He reached out through the bond, focusing on the connection between them, as High Priestess Sirona had taught them. What's happening? The response wasn't words, exactly, more a cluster of impressions. Message, secret, urgency, meet. Marcus finished dressing quickly, selecting clothes that allowed for maximum mobility, and concealed the small blade he'd taken to carrying since the assassination attempt. The palace corridors were quiet, the night shift of guards posted at regular intervals. They nodded to him as he passed his status, as Thiazi bonded to the princess, granting him freedom of movement that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. He followed the pull of the bond to a small antechamber off the main library, a space he'd never visited before. Inside, Celine waited with a hooded figure whose features were obscured by shadow. Marcus, Celine greeted him with obvious relief. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "I felt your concern," he replied, simply, eyes fixed on the stranger. "What's going on?" The hooded figure stepped forward and lowered their covering, revealing a female Vexarin with facial markings that identified her as part of the merchant class. "This is Kira," Celine explained. "She serves as an envoy between the palace and certain reform-minded citizens in the outer provinces. A spy, in other words, or at least an informant." Marcus nodded in greeting but maintained his guard. "You have information." Kira's expression was grave. "Lord Zorath has accelerated his plans. My sources in his household report unusual movements, private meetings with military leaders, coded communications with traditionalist nobles. Most concerning, he has acquired a substantial quantity of corrosive agents from off-world merchants." "Poison?" Marcus asked sharply. "Perhaps," Kira acknowledged. "Or something worse. The particular compound he's obtained is known for its ability to degrade certain types of materials rapidly." Celine's brow furrowed. "What materials?" "Ceremonial stone, Your Highness. The kind used in royal structures, including the Temple of Ancestors." The implications settled heavily between them. The temple housed not only sacred rituals, but also historical records and succession documents, including those that legitimized Celine's claim to heirship. "He would not dare desecrate the temple," Celine whispered, though her uncertainty was clear across the bond. "Directly, no," Kira agreed. "But if an accident were to occur, a structural failure that damaged key archives, it would create significant delays in your ascension process. Delays he could exploit." Marcus felt cold anger building in his chest. "When the ascension moon rises in 3 days, the temple will be prepared for your final recognition ceremony the day after." Kira hesitated. "My sources believe that is when he will strike." Celine's face had gone very still, the expression Marcus had come to recognize as her way of processing shocking information. Through the bond, however, he could feel her mind racing, evaluating options and consequences with remarkable speed. "We need evidence," Marcus said, thinking aloud. "Enough to confront him before the council. Your word alone won't be sufficient, especially against a royal cousin." "My thoughts exactly," Kira replied, reaching into her robes to withdraw a small crystal device, the Vexarin equivalent of a data drive. "Which is why I've been gathering this for the past month. Communications purchase records movements of his personal guard. Separately, they might be explained away. Together, they form a pattern that even the most traditionalist elder would find disturbing." Celine took the crystal, her fingers closing around it tightly. "This is a grave risk you've taken, Kira. For a future worth having, Your Highness." The spy bowed slightly. "I should return before my absence is noted. May the ancestors guide your path." After she had gone, Celine turned to Marcus, the crystal still clutched in her hand. "If this information is accurate, then Zorath is moving against you directly," Marcus finished. "Not just politically, but with intent to sabotage or harm. The temple archives contain the original records of my formal recognition as heir. Without them, my legitimacy could be questioned, particularly by traditionalists who never fully accepted a female successor. Marcus considered the situation tactically. We need to secure those records immediately before Zorath has a chance to act. That's not so simple, Selene replied. The archives can only be accessed during specific ritual periods, or with the joint authorization of the Sovereign and High Priestess Sirona. Then we need to convince them of the threat. Selene's doubt filtered through the bond. My father's health has been declining. Zorath has positioned himself as primary advisor, controlling who gains audience and what information reaches the Sovereign. And Sirona, while supportive of our bond, is bound by traditions thousands of years old. She cannot act without proper protocol. Marcus paced the small chamber, analyzing their options. What about moving up your recognition ceremony before the 3 days have passed? Impossible without appearing suspicious. The Ascension Moon is central to the ritual. It must be visible through the temple's aperture during the ceremony. Through the bond, Marcus could sense Selene's growing determination beneath her outward concern. She had already begun forming a plan. What are you thinking? He asked. We spring the trap, she said simply. We allow Zorath to believe his plot remains undiscovered, but we prepare for his move. When he acts, we will be there to catch him in the attempt with witnesses who cannot be dismissed. It was risky, potentially disastrously so. But Marcus understood the political calculation. Accusations alone, even with Kira's evidence, might not be enough to dislodge someone of Zorath's standing. Catching him in the act would leave no room for doubt. If we do this, he said slowly, we'll need allies we can trust absolutely. People who can move without raising suspicion. Selene nodded. Captain Wren has grown more supportive of our bond. I believe he would help, especially if presented with evidence of treasonous intent. And Ambassador Ray, Marcus added. She has resources outside the palace that might be useful. They spent the next hour outlining a counter-strategy, the Thiassi bond allowing them to communicate with unusual efficiency, anticipating each other's thoughts, building on ideas, without having to fully articulate them. By the time dawnlight began filtering through the chamber's high windows, they had the framework of a plan. We should separate for now, Selene said finally. Your presence in my chambers at this hour would generate unwelcome speculation. Marcus nodded, though he found himself reluctant to leave. The intensity of their planning session had strengthened the bond further, creating a sense of alignment that felt both unfamiliar and strangely right. Be careful, he said, if Zorath suspects you know anything. I have had a lifetime of concealing my thoughts at court, Selene reminded him, with a small smile. One more day will not prove difficult. Marcus reached out impulsively, taking her hand in his. The connection between them flared at the contact, warm and reassuring. 3 days until the Ascension Moon, he said. Let's make sure you're still around to see it. The next 2 days passed in careful covert preparation. Marcus met with Ambassador Ray, sharing Kira's intelligence and outlining their plan. The ambassador was alarmed, but unsurprised by Zorath's plotting. We've had our own suspicions about his connections with certain anti-alliance factions, she admitted. This fits the pattern. What do you need from Earth? Scanning technology, Marcus replied. Something that can detect the corrosive compounds Kira described without being obvious, and possibly back up depending on how many loyalists Zorath has in place. Ambassador Ray nodded thoughtfully. I can arrange for specialized equipment to be delivered as part of our ceremonial gifts for the Ascension. As for personnel, she studied him for a moment. This bond has changed you, Captain. A month ago, you would have approached this as a purely military problem. Marcus hadn't considered the shift in his thinking, but she was right. He was approaching the threat to Selene as both tactical and political, considering long-term consequences and perceptions rather than just immediate security. The bond works both ways, he said. I understand more of Vexaran thinking now, just as Selene better understands human perspectives. It's useful. More than useful, I'd say. Ambassador Ray's expression turned serious. Whatever happens with Zorath, you should know that Earth Alliance officially supports Princess Celine's claim and your role in her court, whatever that role ultimately becomes. The implicit approval of a potential permanent arrangement between them was unexpected. Marcus had been so focused on the immediate threat that he hadn't allowed himself to consider what might come after. "Let's make sure she survives to take the throne first," he replied. "Then we can worry about other implications." Meanwhile, Celine approached Captain Wren, whose initial skepticism melted when presented with Kira's evidence. The captain had served the royal family for decades, his loyalty to the institution transcending personal politics. "I have had concerns about Lord Zorath's activities," he admitted. "Unusual rotations of guards restricted areas suddenly declared off-limits to my patrols. I attributed it to heightened security before your ascension, but this," he gestured to the crystal's projected data, "suggests something far more troubling. I need guards I can trust absolutely positioned near the temple archives," Celine told him. "But they must appear to be regular rotations, nothing that would alert my cousin." Wren nodded grimly. "I have men who would die before betraying their oath to the royal bloodline. They will be in place, Princess. But what of you if Lord Zorath suspects your knowledge?" "I will give him no cause for suspicion," Celine assured him. "The Thiassi bond allows Marcus and me to communicate without obvious signals. We will be prepared when the moment comes." High Priestess Sirona proved the most challenging to convince. Bound by ancient traditions and protocols, she initially resisted any suggestion of a plot against the temple. "The sacred spaces have stood inviolate for millennia," she insisted when Celine carefully broached the subject. "No Vexarin of royal blood would dare desecrate them." "Not openly," Celine agreed. "But accidents might be arranged structural failures that could damage the archives while maintaining plausible deniability." Sirona's ancient eyes narrowed. "You speak of your cousin." Celine neither confirmed nor denied. "I speak of securing our most sacred records before my ascension ceremony. Preventative measures, nothing more." "This bond with the Earth Captain has made you suspicious, Princess." "This bond has given me clarity," Celine countered, "and the courage to name threats rather than simply navigate around them." After long consideration, Sirona agreed to a compromise. The most critical succession documents would be ceremonially reviewed in preparation for the ascension, allowing them to be temporarily relocated to a more secure location within the temple. The process would be presented as a traditional pre-ascension ritual, nothing that would raise alarms among Zorath's supporters. Meanwhile, the bond between Marcus and Celine continued to deepen. They found they could communicate simple concepts across considerable distances, sharing impressions and emotions with increasing clarity. During a state dinner, the night before the ascension moon would rise, they maintained a silent conversation, even while seated at opposite ends of the Great Hall. Marcus alerting Celine to Zorath's suspicious interactions with certain nobles. Celine providing context about political alignments Marcus couldn't have known. When Zorath approached Marcus directly during the evening's entertainment, a display of traditional Vexarin sonic harmonies, the bond allowed Celine to subtly guide the conversation from her position across the hall. Captain Hale, Zorath, greeted him with cold formality. "I trust you are finding our customs illuminating." "Fascinating would be a better word, Lord Zorath," Marcus replied evenly. "Particularly your traditions of loyalty and succession." Something flickered in Zorath's eyes, a brief flash of calculation. "Indeed, traditions that have sustained our civilization for millennia, despite occasional irregularities." Through the bond, Marcus felt Celine's warning, "Careful, testing you." "The princess speaks highly of those traditions," Marcus said, steering away from the implied criticism of Celine's legitimacy. "She seems determined to honor their essence while adapting to new realities." "Adaptation can so easily become dilution," Zorath countered smoothly. "One must be careful not to lose what makes Vexara unique in a misguided pursuit of outside influences." He speaks of me as outside influence, came Celine's thought. Political warning. Marcus inclined his head slightly. Preservation and progress need not be enemies, Lord Zorath. The strongest alliances honor the best of all traditions involved. A diplomatic answer, Zorath said with a thin smile. I would expect nothing less from one trained in Earth's political arts. But tell me, Captain, when your bond compels you to choose between Earth's interests and Vexara's, where will your loyalty lie? The question was a trap designed to force Marcus into either renouncing his human heritage or confirming suspicions about divided loyalties. Through the bond, he felt Celine's immediate response a complex emotion he interpreted as righteous indignation mixed with strategic calculation. Truth. Bond responds to truth. Understanding her meaning. Marcus allowed the Thiassi bond to guide his answer, knowing that Zorath and many others present would recognize the distinctive resonance that accompanied bond truth. The Thiassi doesn't demand I stop being human any more than it requires Princess Celine to stop being Vexaran. He said, his voice taking on the particular harmonic quality that indicated bond influence. It creates something new between us, a bridge rather than a barrier. That bridge can strengthen both worlds if given the chance to develop naturally. Around them, conversations had quieted as nobles eavesdropped on the exchange. Marcus could see surprise on many faces. Even those aligned with Zorath seemed struck by the evident sincerity of his response. Zorath's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Pretty words, Captain. Time will reveal their substance. With a stiff bow, he moved away, leaving Marcus at the center of curious attention. Through the bond, Marcus felt Celine's satisfaction. Well handled. He expected defensive reaction. Your calm unsettles him. As the evening progressed, Marcus noticed Zorath engaged in hushed conversations with several military officers and noble allies. The preparations were clearly advancing. Tomorrow would bring the Ascension Moon, and with it, the culmination of whatever plot Zorath had set in motion. That night, unable to sleep despite the late hour, Marcus stood on his balcony, watching the first edge of Vexara's larger moon beginning to rise. Tomorrow, it would reach the perfect position for the Ascension ceremony, directly aligned with the temple's central aperture during the ritual hour. He sensed Celine's approach before he heard her soft footsteps. The bond had grown sensitive enough that he could distinguish her presence from others, even without visual confirmation. You should be resting, he said without turning. Tomorrow will test us both. My mind would not quiet, she replied, coming to stand beside him at the balcony rail. Too many possibilities to consider, too many ways things could go wrong. In the moonlight, her luminescent markings seemed to glow with particular intensity, tracing patterns across her skin that Marcus had come to find beautiful in their alien complexity. The bond between them hummed with shared tension and unspoken concerns. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. The bond, if I hadn't intervened, you wouldn't be facing this particular crisis. If you hadn't intervened, I might be dead, Celine pointed out. And Zorath would be preparing for his own ascension, not plotting to undermine mine. Still, Marcus turned to face her fully. This Thiassi thing has complicated everything, your politics, my position, Earth-Vexara relations. Celine was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she reached out her cool fingers, gently touching the place on his side, where the healing wound now showed only as a faint, luminescent pattern beneath his skin. The bond revealed truth between us, she said softly. Truth I might never have discovered otherwise. For that alone I cannot regret it. The simple touch sent awareness cascading through the bond layers of emotion and understanding that transcended their cultural and biological differences. Marcus found himself covering her hand with his own, holding it against his side where the Thiassi had first taken root. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, we face it together. Celine's smile held both vulnerability and resolve. The third stage of Thiassi protection works in both directions. You've already fulfilled your part. Tomorrow may be my turn to fulfill mine. The Ascension Moon rose full, and radiant over Vexara's amber spires, its light casting everything in pale silver. The Temple of Ancestors seemed to glow from within as the moonlight struck its crystalline surfaces at precisely the angles the ancient architects had intended. Marcus and Celine arrived separately, she as part of the royal procession, he alongside Ambassador Ray and the Earth delegation. Captain Wren had positioned his most trusted guards at key points throughout the temple complex, their presence unremarkable during such an important ceremonial occasion. Marcus felt the tension in the bond the moment Celine's procession entered the temple forecourt. Not fear exactly, but heightened alertness, the same focused awareness he recognized from his own combat experiences. She was prepared for confrontation. Zorath arrived early, came her thought across the bond, with larger entourage than expected. Marcus scanned the gathered Vexaran nobles, quickly locating Zorath near the temple entrance. The Lord was surrounded by a group of supporters that included both military officers and traditionalist council members. Their positioning seemed casual, but effectively controlled access to the main temple doors, the only public entrance to the sacred space. Ambassador Ray has scanning device. Marcus responded through the bond. Needs proximity to detect compounds. He felt Celine's acknowledgement as she continued with the formal procession, greeting dignitaries and accepting ceremonial gifts. The official ascension ceremony would not begin until midday, when the moon reached its zenith above the temple's central aperture. That gave them hours to identify and neutralize whatever trap Zorath had set. Ambassador Ray moved skillfully through the crowd, the ceremonial gift box she carried, containing both a legitimate offering and the scanning technology Marcus had requested. As she approached Zorath's group to present Earth's respects, Marcus positioned himself to observe their reactions. Nothing detected near entrance. Came Ray's discreet update through her communications device. Moving toward inner chamber. Marcus frowned. If the corrosive compounds weren't at the entrance, they must be already inside, perhaps planted during earlier preparations. He caught Captain Wren's eye across the forecourt and gave a subtle signal. The captain immediately directed several of his guards to shift positions, creating a more comprehensive security perimeter around the inner temple chambers. The formal procession began moving into the temple proper. Marcus followed at a respectful distance, his senses heightened, both by training and the Thiassi bond. Through his connection with Celine, he could feel her maintaining calm diplomatic interactions while simultaneously scanning her surroundings for threats. Inside the temple's main chamber had been prepared for the recognition ceremony. The circular platform where they had undergone the truth rite now bore additional ceremonial objects, the crown of continuity, that Celine would receive the ancient texts of succession that would be read, the sovereign scepter representing the transfer of authority. High Priestess Sirona waited beside the platform, her ancient eyes moving carefully over the assembled nobles. When her gaze met Marcus's, he saw recognition and subtle warning there. Something was wrong. Archives, came Celine's urgent thought through the bond. Sirona signals issue with archives. The archives were located beneath the main chamber, accessible only through a ceremonial passage behind the platform. If Zorath had managed to plant his corrosive compounds there, they could already be damaging the critical succession documents. Marcus moved toward Ambassador Ray, who had positioned herself near one of the chamber's support columns. "Scanner," he murmured as he passed her. "Need to check lower levels." Ray smoothly handed him a small device disguised as a ceremonial token, the kind many delegates carried as symbols of respect. "Detection range is limited," she warned quietly. "You'll need to be within 3 meters of the compound." The challenge would be reaching the archive entrance without alerting Zorath or his allies. Marcus noticed that several of Zorath's military supporters had positioned themselves near the ceremonial passage, effectively blocking casual access. "Need distraction," he sent to Celine. "Guards blocking archive passage." Her response came with a clarity that impressed him. "Sovereign's arrival, 5 minutes. All attention will shift to entrance." Marcus nodded slightly and began circulating through the chamber, gradually working his way closer to the platform. Through the bond, he could feel Celine tracking his movements, while maintaining her own ceremonial duties. The announcement of the sovereign's imminent arrival sent a ripple of expectation through the chamber. As predicted, attention shifted toward the main entrance where the sovereign's procession would appear. Even Zorath's guards turned slightly protocol, demanding that they acknowledge their ruler's presence. Marcus seized the momentary distraction to slip behind a decorative column, and then quickly behind the platform itself. The passageway to the archives was marked by a subtle glow in the floor panels, visible only from this angle. As he approached, the scanner in his hand began to emit a faint vibration, confirmation of the very compounds Kira had warned them about. They had been right. Zorath had planted something potentially devastating near the historical records. Marcus activated his communication device. "Captain Wren, compounds detected near archive entrance. Request immediate security presence, discreet approach." "Acknowledged," came Wren's terse reply. "2 guards converging on your position." The bond flared with sudden alarm. Celine had noticed something. "Zorath, watching passage. Has seen you." Marcus turned just in time to see Zorath break away from his group, moving with deceptive casualness toward the platform. Their eyes met across the chamber, and any pretense of diplomacy vanished from Zorath's expression, replaced by cold fury. "Security breach," Zorath called out, his voice carrying through the chamber. "The human agent attempts to access restricted areas." The accusation created immediate confusion, exactly what Zorath intended. His loyal guards moved to intercept Marcus, while other nobles looked on in alarm. The perfect cover for whatever was about to happen in the archives. "Lord Zorath speaks falsely," came Celine's clear voice, cutting through the chaos. She had moved to the center of the chamber, her royal authority commanding attention despite the tumult. "Captain Hale acts under my directive, investigating a threat to our sacred records." The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words registered. Celine had publicly challenged her cousin's honor, a serious matter in Vexaran culture. Zorath's expression flickered between rage and calculation. "A convenient claim, cousin. But the human has no authority in our sacred spaces, regardless of your personal connection to him. He has the authority of Thiassi," countered High Priestess Sirona, moving to stand beside Celine. "And the sacred charge of my office. If Captain Hale has detected danger to our archives, it is his bond duty to investigate." The arrival of the sovereign himself brought the confrontation to a momentary pause. Frail, but still commanding, the ruler of Vexara entered the chamber, supported by his personal attendants. His gaze moved from Celine to Zorath, to Marcus, assessing the tension with ancient wisdom. "What disturbance interrupts my daughter's ascension preparations?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong, despite his physical weakness. Before anyone could respond, a low rumble emanated from beneath the floor, exactly where the archives were located. Small particles of dust drifted down from the ceiling as the vibration intensified. "The compounds are activating," Marcus called out. "The support structures are being compromised." Captain Wren and his guards had reached the archive passage, but the rumbling was intensifying rapidly. Zorath's expression shifted from anger to something like triumph. Whatever he had planted was working faster than even he had anticipated. Through the bond, Marcus felt Celine's immediate decision. Temple evacuation, now. "Father," she said aloud, moving swiftly to the sovereign's side. "The temple structure is compromised. We must evacuate immediately." "Absurd," Zorath countered. "This is merely the resonance of the ascension moon with the temple crystals, a natural phenomenon during this sacred time." But his words were belied by the increasing tremors and the sound of cracking stone from below. Even his own supporters were looking uncertain, several backing toward the exits. The sovereign's ancient eyes narrowed as he studied his nephew. "Zorath," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "What have you done?" Before Zorath could answer, a section of the floor near the platform collapsed inward. The chamber erupted into panic as nobles and delegates rushed toward the exits. Captain Wren and his guards moved to protect the Sovereign, while Ambassador Ray coordinated the Earth delegation's evacuation. Marcus felt Celine's determination surge through the bond. She wasn't leaving, not while the sacred records that legitimized her claim remained in danger. Without hesitation, he pushed through the crowd toward her. "The records," she said as he reached her side. "If they're destroyed—" "I know." Marcus glanced toward the now gaping hole that had once been the archive passage. "But that's not structural damage, it's deliberate sabotage. The vibration pattern is too regular." He was right. The tremors were intensifying in a specific sequence, designed to cause maximum damage to the archives, while leaving the main temple structure largely intact. Clever. It would appear as a targeted structural failure, rather than deliberate destruction. "Captain Wren," Celine called, "secure my father's evacuation. I must retrieve the succession documents." "Your Highness, the danger—" "Is precisely why I must go," she interrupted. "Without those records, everything we've worked for is lost." Marcus didn't waste time arguing. "I'm going with you." The bond between them pulsed with shared purpose as they approached the damaged passage. Behind them, Zorath shouted orders to his own guards, whether to stop them or ensure the destruction was complete. Marcus couldn't be sure. The passage had partially collapsed, but there was enough space for them to navigate carefully downward. The archives below were filled with swirling dust and the acrid scent of the corrosive compound, which appeared to be targeting specific structural elements, rather than the documents themselves, a subtle approach that would have been attributed to age and instability, rather than sabotage. There, Celine pointed toward an ornate container on a central pedestal. "The primary succession records." As they moved toward it, a section of ceiling crashed down behind them, sealing off their exit path. Through the bond, Marcus felt Celine's determination waver for the first time, not with fear for herself, but with the realization that she might have led them both into a trap. "Together," he reminded her through the bond. "Whatever happens." Her response was immediate and resolute. "Together." They reached the pedestal, just as another violent tremor shook the chamber. Marcus grabbed the document container, while Celine scanned the space for an alternative exit. The traditional architecture of the temple included multiple pathways and chambers. There had to be another way out. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a small illuminated panel near the far wall. "Emergency passage, used by temple guardians during the ancient wars." As they made their way across the unstable floor, a figure appeared at the top of a different passage, one that must have connected to another part of the temple. Zorath stood silhouetted against the dust-filled air, a ceremonial weapon in his hand. "Foolish," he called down to them. "Though I suppose I should thank you for simplifying matters. Your tragic deaths in a temple accident will eliminate two problems at once." "The only tragedy here is your betrayal," Celine replied, her voice steady, despite the danger. "Sabotaging sacred spaces, endangering our heritage, all for your ambition." "For Vexara's purity," Zorath corrected. "Your alliance with Earth weakens us, dilutes what makes us superior. Your human pet is merely the most visible symbol of the contamination you would bring." He raised the weapon, a projectile launcher disguised as a ceremonial staff. "The records will be lost, you will be mourned, and I will guide our people back to the path of strength." It happened in an instant. Zorath fired. Marcus saw the trajectory and knew it would strike Celine directly. Without conscious thought, he lunged sideways, raising the heavy document container to deflect the projectile. The impact sent him staggering backward as the projectile detonated, not a lethal charge, but one designed to accelerate the structural collapse. The explosion sent a new wave of tremors through the chamber. Zorath lost his footing as the passage he stood in began to crumble, his expression changing from triumph to horror as he realized he had triggered a collapse larger than he intended. "Marcus." Celine was at his side, instantly supporting him, as pain bloomed across his chest, where the projectile had struck. The document container had absorbed most of the impact, but he could feel at least one broken rib. Through their bond, he felt something new activating a surge of protective energy emanating from Selene. The markings on her skin glowed with sudden intensity, the pattern shifting and extending outward toward him. "The third stage," she said, recognition in her voice. "Protection." The Thiazi bond flared between them, creating what felt like a bubble of stability amid the ongoing collapse. Selene's eyes met his knowledge passing between them without words. She understood what needed to be done. With one arm supporting Marcus and the other clutching the document container, Selene guided them toward the emergency passage she had identified. Behind them, Zorath's shouts turned to cries for help as his escape route disappeared under falling debris. "Leave him," Marcus questioned through the bond, even as pain radiated through his chest with each breath. Selene's response held both royal authority and personal mercy. "Not our way, not my way." Despite their own perilous situation, she paused long enough to call up to her cousin. "Follow our path, Zorath, quickly." For a moment it seemed he would refuse out of pride. Then survival instinct overcame arrogance, and he scrambled down what remained of his passage toward them. The emergency exit Selene had found led them through a narrow tunnel, clearly designed for just such catastrophes. The Thiazi bond between them continued to pulse strongly, and Marcus felt his pain receding slightly, as though Selene were somehow absorbing or neutralizing it through their connection. They emerged into sunlight to find the temple forecourt in organized chaos. Captain Wren had established a security perimeter, while medical personnel attended to minor injuries from the evacuation. The sovereign sat beneath a temporary canopy, surrounded by council members and attendants. When Selene appeared, document container in hand and supporting both Marcus and a dust-covered Zorath, a hush fell over the gathering. It was a tableau none could have anticipated: the princess, her human bond partner, and her rival cousin emerging together from what should have been certain doom. "Father," Selene called, her voice carrying across the forecourt. "The succession records are secure." She handed the container to High Priestess Sirona, who received it with visible relief. The sovereign's eyes moved from the records to Zorath, who could no longer hide his role in what had transpired. "Nephew," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "you will account for your actions before the full council." Zorath straightened, despite his injuries, remnants of his dignity resurfacing. "I acted for Vexara's future, to preserve our ways from outside corruption." "You acted for your ambition," the sovereign countered, "and betrayed the very traditions you claim to protect." He turned to Captain Wren. "Take him to the reflection chambers. He will await the council's judgment there." As Zorath was led away, Marcus felt Selene's emotions through the bond, not triumph or satisfaction, but a complex mixture of sorrow, relief, and determination. Her cousin's betrayal had shaken her, but it had also reinforced her conviction that Vexara needed the changes she proposed. Medical attendants approached to treat their injuries, but Selene waved them toward Marcus first. "Attend to him," she ordered. "The Thiazi bond has sustained me, but his wounds are physical." As the attendants guided Marcus to a treatment area, he maintained the bond connection with Selene, who turned to address the gathered nobles and officials. "Today, we have witnessed both treachery and loyalty," she said, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. "Lord Zorath sought to destroy our sacred records and succession traditions, all while claiming to protect them. Captain Hale, a human born of Earth, risked his life to preserve those same traditions, despite having no heritage among us." Through the bond, Marcus felt the impact of her words rippling through the crowd: skepticism, consideration, reluctant acknowledgement. "The Thiazi bond between us has now completed its third stage," Selene continued. "Protection has been offered and received in both directions. The ancestors have witnessed and approved this bond, the first between Vexaran and human. I ask you all to consider what this might teach us about the future we could build together." Over the next several days, the political landscape of Vexara shifted dramatically. With Zorath's treachery exposed and the succession records preserved, opposition to Selene's ascension crumbled. The Ascension Moon ceremony was rescheduled for the following month to be held in the Great Hall, while the temple underwent repairs. The Council of Elders, shaken by how close they had come to disaster, proved more receptive to Selene's proposed reforms. Earth-Vexara relations, already improving through the Thiassi Bond, strengthened further as Ambassador Ray negotiated expanded trade and cultural exchange programs. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the balcony of the royal apartments, now partially his own, watching the twin moons of Vexara rise over the amber spires of the capital. The city had changed in subtle but significant ways since Selene's formal ascension. New structures combining Vexaran and Earth architectural elements had appeared. Mixed delegations of humans and Vexarans moved through the streets. Children of both species played together in newly established educational centers. "Reflecting on our progress," Selene asked, joining him at the balcony rail. Her formal regalia had been set aside for the evening, replaced by simpler attire that nonetheless emphasized her royal status through the intricate patterns of her markings. "On how much can change because of one impulsive action." Marcus replied, his hand unconsciously, moving to the place where the ceremonial dagger had struck. The wound had long since healed, but the luminescent pattern remained a permanent reminder of the bond that had reshaped two worlds. Through that bond, which had reached its final stage of complete bonding 3 months ago, he could sense Selene's contentment, mixed with her ever-present determination to continue the reforms she had begun. "Not impulsive," she corrected gently. "Instinctive. You followed your deepest nature, as did I, in acknowledging the Thiassi. And now we have interspecies educational programs, technology exchanges, and joint research facilities." Marcus smiled. "All because I jumped in front of a blade." Selene's fingers intertwined with his, the touch sending familiar warmth through their bond. "All because you chose compassion over calculation. Because you demonstrated that loyalty can transcend differences." Below them, the city continued its evening activities, the blending of two cultures, still new enough to create occasional friction, but growing more harmonious with each passing day. Human engineers worked alongside Vexaran biotechnicians, developing hybrid technologies that neither world could have created alone. Diplomatic apprentices from Earth studied ancient Vexaran traditions, while young Vexaran nobles explored human arts and sciences. "The fourth stage suits us," Marcus observed, feeling the deep resonance of their completed bond. The complete bonding had formalized their union in the eyes of both their worlds, creating a partnership that was both personal and political. "It does," Selene agreed. "Though I suspect we will continue to discover new dimensions to it as time passes." Her markings pulsed gently with affection. After all, no Vexaran has ever been bonded to a human before. We are writing this tradition anew. As the moons rose higher, casting their intertwined shadows across the balcony floor, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From security specialist to royal consort, from alien princess to trusted partner, their paths had merged through one instinctive act of protection, creating something neither could have imagined. "To new traditions," he said, raising the cup of Vexaran nectar they'd been sharing. "And ancient wisdom." Selene completed the traditional response, coming naturally to her lips. "May they guide our worlds toward the future we build together." Their silhouettes merged against the backdrop of the twin moons, symbolic of a bond that had transcended biology, culture, and tradition, proving that the greatest strength comes not from isolation, but from the courage to forge new connections.